Hello there. I am Rachel Bailey. Welcome to the Yuck Factor. Can't wait to talk to you about it. Before I begin, I'm actually just going to encourage you, though, to try to listen to this presentation all the way through to the end. There's a lot of information. It'll last probably about 30 to 40 minutes, and would love you to stay till the end because although I'm going to be giving examples throughout the presentation, there's going to be sort of one big example at the end that puts everything together, and also I'm going to tell you a little bit about a really cool offer that I have for you to help you with the Yuck Factor. So, without further ado, let's get started. You are here because you want to learn about the Yuck Factor and why specifically your kids don't listen and you can't stop yelling. And that's exactly what I'm going to tell you. And I'm going to start right now by telling you exactly why in the beginning of the presentation. The reason that your kids don't listen and you can't stop yelling, it's the same reason, or I should say reasons, because they're two reasons. But what causes your kids to not listen and what causes you to not be able to stop yelling is actually the same two things. And I'm going to tell you what those two things are right now. So reason number one is you yell because you don't know what else to do that will work. You don't have the tools to do something different. It's going to sound like a cliche. I know you've heard this over and over, but the truth is there is no manual to tell you how to get your children to cooperate more. There's no one telling you how to do this or what the most effective ways are, and you might just not know what they are. And we had models probably in our parents, but a lot of us don't want to do the same things that our parents did. We either can't or don't want to use their strategies. So we just don't know what to do that's going to work. And the same is true of your kids when they're not cooperating. A lot of the times they don't have the tools to do something different. So for example, if you ask your child to stop playing with a toy so that they can clean up, a lot of the times that child doesn't have the tools to know how to actually stop doing something that they're enjoying to go do something that's less enjoyable, like cleaning up. They just don't know how to do that. Or if you think about an older child, maybe you've asked your older child to clean his or her room and they're just not listening to you. It may not be that they're necessarily being defiant. A lot of older kids just don't know how to maybe deal with the overwhelm of a really, really messy room. Or maybe they don't know how to fit cleaning in their room in their really busy schedules. A lot of the times they just don't have the tools that we assume that they do. So that is the first reason that you probably can't stop yelling and your child isn't listening. But there's another reason, and that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit more tonight. And that second factor is that yuck factor. And the reality is the yuck factor gets in the way of doing the right thing. So you may have the tools to not yell, and your child may have the tools to clean up when they need to, but often the yuck factor prevents people from doing what they know is the right thing. So obviously, we want to know, what is the yuck factor? Well, the yuck factor is really anything that doesn't feel good or doesn't feel right in the moment. So it could be being tired or stressed, feeling guilty or helpless or resentful or frustrated. All of those yucky feelings we have as parents and kids have a lot of the day as well. Those yucky feelings create a yuck factor that actually affect behavior that I'm going to talk about a little bit more. But it's not just those yucky feelings. The yuck factor is also when there's a mismatch between a person's temperament or mood and the environment. So for example, I have a lot of parents who talk to me about wanting their children to sit still when they're at church or when they're at a store, and the children don't do that. And often the children can't do that for whatever reason, and there's a mismatch between what they can actually do and what their environment is asking them to do. And that mismatch also creates a yuck. So the behavior comes from that mismatch as well. So those are the two reasons that you can't stop yelling and that your children don't listen. And I want to tell you a little bit about me to let you know how I know that those are really the two reasons. So this is a little bit about me, Rachel. That's obviously a picture of me and my two little girls, because if you want to know me, the first and most important thing about me is that I am a mom of two girls who are almost 2 and 4 years old. In addition to being a mother, I have a master's degree in clinical psychology, and I am a certified positive discipline parent educator. I've worked as a tutor, an ADHD coach, an academic coach. I've been an intensive in-home mentor where I went into people's homes to help with family relationships. And I've also been a psychotherapist. And when I was doing psychotherapy, I was actually working with adolescents and children a lot. And that has helped me so much in my role as a positive parenting specialist because I have learned exactly what adolescents and children are thinking because our sessions were confidential and they would eventually open up and tell me why they did the things that they did. The things that we often scratch our heads and say, why are they doing that? So I learned about things like what I call the screw you principle, which is basically the reason some adolescents actually make bad and unhealthy decisions because they're intentionally trying to say screw you to either a parent or a teacher or someone that they're angry with. They know what the consequences of that bad decision is, but they're intentionally making that decision because they want to say screw you more than they want to avoid those consequences. So I know about those honest answers from kids and adolescents, and it helps me help parents. So when I was a psychotherapist, I'll be honest, I had a lot of success in helping adolescents and kids feel a lot more confident and start to make healthier decisions. So when I was doing this work, I had a lot of parents who would, be really happy with the work I was doing, but they would say, "Hey, Rachel, you're with my child 1 hour a week. What do we do all that other time?" So what I started doing was helping parents more, teaching them what to say and do to motivate this positive behavior. And I realized how much I enjoyed working with parents and how much parents need these tools. And ever since that, I've just worked with parents. I don't actually see adolescents or kids anymore. I see parents all the time now. And I basically proactively help parents raise confident, responsible kids who have the tools they need to be successful later in life, the tools to have good relationships, the tools to be able to find meaningful work in whatever they do. And that's what I spend my time doing now. But I have a confession that I want to make. I did not want to be a parent for most of my life. In fact, probably until about my mid to late 20s, my parents had just assumed I would never have kids and they wouldn't get grandkids from me. And it's not that I don't like children. Obviously, I was working with them, so I really enjoy being with them. But I also don't enjoy chaos. And I don't enjoy loud noises. I don't enjoy people being dependent on me for every little thing. And I'm a pretty reactive person, so if things don't go my way, I do tend to react to it pretty quickly. And I knew as a psychologist that those were not great makings for a good parent, so I thought I don't want to be a parent. And that's exactly why I do this for a living, because the truth is now I am a parent, and I'm so happy because I have the tools that allows me to be the type of parent I want to be. Even though I'm still reactive, I can actually parent calmly and in a connected way because I know how to do it. I have taught myself and now hundreds of other parents how to do this. And I think it's helpful, the fact that I didn't know how to do this and it doesn't come intuitively to me, that I can help other people that are struggling, whether they wanted to be parents or not. Because I realize how helpful it can be to know what to say and do in the moment when it doesn't come instinctively to you, because I know what I need in my family. So I founded Parenting by Heart a few years ago, and I called it Parenting by Heart, which is the strategy basically I teach, which is a respect-based approach to raising confident, responsible children so you can feel good about the way you parent. And that's what I do now. So let's talk a little bit more about the yuck factor. So what is the yuck factor? The concept is actually pretty simple. When we feel good, we act good. When we feel bad, we act bad. And I read this quote a few years ago, or actually when I first got started doing this type of work, that just really struck me and hit home, and this is something that motivates me all the time in the work that I do. It's by Jane Nelson, who's the founder of Positive Discipline, and she said, "Where did we get the crazy idea that in order to make a child act better, we must make him feel worse?" The truth is, feeling worse makes kids act worse. So what we want to do is understand the yuck factor and how we can use that to our advantage to motivate more positive behavior. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an example for this yuck factor as I'm describing it. From a mother who told me a few months ago she was describing this situation where she was giving her daughter a bath, and sometimes the water would get in her daughter's eyes. And sometimes her daughter would be fine with it and just say, "Oh, hey, mommy, water got in my eyes." And sometimes the daughter's reaction was incredibly dramatic. She would cry and she would scream, and it would be like that the world was ending. And the mother said to me, "I just don't know why sometimes she's okay and sometimes she's not." So we started to do a little digging and found out that the daughter was okay with it when she was in a really good place. If she'd had a good day and felt really good about things, then she was able to handle the water in her eyes and just sort of shrug it off. But if she had had a bad day, if she was in yuck for some reason, she was overly dramatic because she just couldn't handle something else going wrong. And interestingly, what the mom told me next was that when her daughter was in this dramatic place, even the mom's reaction differed sometimes. So sometimes when the daughter was being very dramatic, the mom would say, "Honey, you're going to be fine," and she was very calm and she was very patient with her daughter. Other times when her daughter, what she called overreacted, she would just lose it on her daughter and yell at her and just say, "Stop complaining, it's only water," which she later regretted because she'd rather be a patient, loving parent. And so I asked the mom to do the same thing with her reaction. And what she realized pretty quickly after having done it the first time with her daughter was that when she was in a good place, she could handle her daughter's drama with patience and love. And when she wasn't in a good place, she couldn't handle it in the same way because when she was in yuck, she was unable to help her daughter through her yuck. This is the same thing. Let's say you have an older child. And let's say you have an older son and you want him to drive your younger son somewhere, and you say, can you drive him somewhere? Chances are his response is going to depend on whether he's in a good place or a bad place. When kids are in a good place, they're much more willing to be cooperative. So if he's had a good day, not stressed by homework, he's much more likely to say, "Sure, Mom, I'll drive my brother." If he's in yuck for some reason, he's probably not as likely to cooperate. So what I want to do is show you the proof based on your life and your experiences. So I want you to think of a time when you were feeling really good. Maybe you were well rested, you weren't really stressed, you had just had a good experience, maybe a fun time with your family, or a celebration with friends, maybe a great conversation with someone. Think about a time like that. And what I want you to do is think about that experience and how you feel and act after that experience. When you are in a good place, how do you behave? How's your behavior affected? When you're feeling happy and someone walks up to you and does something that would really frustrate you normally, how do you react? Most people, when they're in a good place, even if something frustrating happens, they can handle it so much better. So let's contrast that with the time when you were feeling really bad. Maybe you were tired or hungry, overwhelmed. Maybe you'd had a bad experience, a fight with a friend or a spouse or a partner. Maybe a bad day at work or with the kids. Maybe someone cut you off in traffic. But let's say you're in a bad place. Think about that experience for you. And think about what your behavior's like when you're in a bad space. If you're in a bad space already, and your children come up to you and want something, how do you react to them? Chances are, when you're in yuck, you're not reacting in the way that you want to act. And that's because yuck affects our behavior. Our behavior is actually a sign of our internal state. Our behavior shows how we're feeling inside. Now, I'm not saying that we can't act positively if we're feeling yuck inside. We actually can. So a lot of parents will come up to me and will say, "Hey, Rachel, you'd be so proud of me. I was so upset inside, yet I stayed calm with my children." So it's not that we can't do that, but I will tell you, if you probably recognize this already, that takes so much energy to do. It takes energy to be inconsistent, to act inconsistently with what's going on inside of us. And in reality, even if we're acting calm when we're feeling yucky, later it does come out and we usually explode. So what I want you to get out of this is that our yuck factor is a bigger prediction of our reaction than the situation we're reacting to. And basically what that means is we're going to react based on our yuck factor, not based on the situation. So if we go back to that example with the little girl in the bath, she's not necessarily reacting to the water, because obviously sometimes it doesn't bother her when it gets in her eyes. What she's reacting to is her yuck. And here's the thing with yuck. When we feel yuck, every person's tendency is to get rid of yuck because we can't handle anymore. When we're already in yuck, we just try to deflect it. We try to get rid of it on whoever and whatever is around. It's sort of like the hot potato game. Like if someone passes you a hot potato, the first thing you want to do is you kind of bobble it around and then you want to get rid of it. And yuck is the same way. The getting rid of it is what creates a lot of the behaviors that we regret later. When we're feeling yucky and we yell and we punish and we threaten these things that we're not going to follow through on, that's because we're in yuck. And when our child came to us with maybe their yuck, we just tried to deflect it. And it also affects kids' behavior. I used to see this all the time when I was working with them. Our desire to get rid of the yuck is what creates behaviors like children not being able to accept responsibility for the things they've done wrong. It creates the desire to blame others, or the behavior of being a sore loser. Because if we're already in yuck and we lose a game, we're not going to be able to handle it well. We're just going to try to get rid of it. The truth is that once we have yuck inside, we avoid adding more yuck, even at the cost of what we crave most, so even at the cost of our relationships. It's just a natural tendency. And obviously, if you're listening, you can hear that this behavior is not logical. And there's a scientific reason that this behavior is not logical. The fact is that during these times, the logical part of our brain is not accessible. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the human brain and what's going on when we're being this illogical and reacting to our yuck. So the human brain, I'm going to talk about what's on the left side of the slide now. The human brain has something that is purely unique to humans, which is called the prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain that actually allows us to do things that other animals and living creatures can't do. This is what gives us our rational thought, our ability to think through problems, especially complicated problems. This is where our ability to act consistently with our values and morals is. It's where our impulse control lies, and it's also where our ability to delay gratification lies. All of that is uniquely human, and that's located in the front of our brain. Excuse me. Now we also have this other part of our brain, which is called the limbic system, and it's in the middle part of the brain. It's actually slightly more primitive, and it's a part of the brain that we share with other living creatures. It's the part of our brain where our emotions lie. Emotions like fear, frustration, resentment, and overwhelm all live in the limbic system. And other animals feel these primitive emotions, especially like fear as well. This is also where our fight or flight response lives. And the interesting thing is that when we are in these emotions, when we're in fear, frustration, resentment, overwhelm, all of these emotions, all of this neuroimaging research shows that we actually cannot access the front of our brain, the prefrontal cortex. So we can't access our rational thought, our ability to think logically. We can't access our problem-solving skills or our ability to act consistently with our values and our morals. We can't access our ability to control our impulses and delay our gratification. So that explains a lot of the behavior. What I want to do is give you an example of this to show a little bit of what it looks like in real life. So I mentioned earlier that I'm very reactive, and I happen to be married to a man who is very calm. He's not easily flappable. Most things just don't get to him, which is great, but also drives me crazy sometimes because I'm just very jealous of that. But the reality is he's a calm person. Something happened about 3 weeks ago that he told me about, which is a perfect example of his inability to access his prefrontal cortex. So he's driving in the car with my 2 daughters, and I wasn't there at the time. And my 2-year-old, for whatever reason, she started crying. Now, my 2-year-old starts crying. It really upsets my 4-year-old, and she starts crying, and she wants her sister to stop. So my 4-year-old is now in yuck as well because she just wants her sister to stop crying. She's holding an apple at the time, and she is in so much yuck that she's speaking really rudely to her father. And she says, "Daddy, take this apple now." My husband is sitting in the car with a crying 2-year-old, a crying 4-year-old, and a 4-year-old who's being blatantly disrespectful to him. At that point, he's frustrated, he's overwhelmed, and what he did in that moment is he actually hit the apple out of her hand and onto the floor. Now, all that did was upset everybody even more. And if you ask him about it now, he knows logically that was not the right thing to do. But in that moment, he was just flooded with emotion, and he couldn't access the more rational part of his brain. And that's what happens to all of us. What we do is we act now and regret later. And it's because of our yuck. And I'm going to tell you about a quote that I heard in the movie Frozen. And please forgive me, but I have a 2- and 4-year-old girl, so I'm sort of surrounded by Frozen all the time. But the movie had this quote in one of the songs that just really hit home with me and explained this phenomenon. The quote is, "People make bad choices when they're scared or mad or stressed." And the first thing I thought when I heard that quote is scared or mad or stressed. That's sort of like synonyms for parenting. But the point is that people make bad choices when they're in these states. And these bad choices are the yuck factor. And that's basically what I'm talking about, that's creating some of this negative behavior that we can get rid of if we do something different. So of course, I'm sure you want to know what causes yuck. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So there are 3 things that primarily cause most of the yuck that I've seen when I've worked with people. The first is when biological needs are not met. And this is one that parents are often pretty instinctively aware of. So you know if your child's in yuck because they're tired, their behavior is going to be cranky. You know if your child's in yuck because they're hungry, their behavior is again going to be pretty negative. The other biological component is the one I mentioned before, though. It's where there's a mismatch between someone's mood or temperament and the environment. And when this mismatch happens, it may not originally be caused by yuck, but when that mismatch isn't fixed, then yuck exacerbates the problem. So if we have these expectations for our children that they actually can't meet, and we don't change those expectations a little bit, yuck follows and the situation just gets much worse. So those are the biological needs. There are also emotional needs, and when these needs are not met, yuck happens and misbehavior follows. So this is where I spend a lot of time with parents, because most parents are not aware of the importance of these emotional needs. A lot of parents, and not just parents, but people, think these needs are sort of luxuries. They are not luxuries. They're needs that must be met, or some bad behavior will come of them. And I will tell you that this is a gold mine for improving behavior, because once these needs are met in ourselves and our children, behavior is so much better. The 5 needs that I focus on are the need for belonging, significance, control, capability, and emotional safety. And I can't go into them each now, unfortunately, or this presentation would just go on forever, and I respect that you're probably pretty busy. But I will go over these needs with those who are interested, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation. So we have the biological needs not being met, we have the emotional needs not being met, and last, when our expectations are not met, we often go pretty quickly into yuck. So you could probably think of a million examples that relate to our expectations not being met. If you want to get out of the door at 8 o'clock and your children are dilly-dallying and dawdling, chances are you're going to get really frustrated because your expectation is that you have to be somewhere. And if it's not met, you're going to get frustrated. You're going to go to that more primitive part of the brain, and you're going to react in a way that you later regret. Well, children do the same thing. They have a lot of expectations about the way they like things to go. So if you have a younger child who's at a party and they're having a lot of fun, they want to stay, but we have to take them, they're going to pretty quickly go into yuck. Maybe an older child, their expectation about a party is that they want to go to a party, and we say no because we don't know if it's going to be safe. Well, their expectation was that they were going to be able to go and have a good time at this party, and they can't, and that's where this negative behavior, this disrespectful talk and defiance comes out, because their expectations aren't met. So those are the 3 primary things that cause yuck, and I want you to see is that our automatic responses create this cycle of yuck and negative behavior. Because basically what happens is a parent will be in yuck for whatever reason. Maybe their child is just being particularly frustrating, or they've had a bad day. And when their child is doing something and they're in yuck, they may yell or punish or shame or blame their child. And that creates yuck in the child. When the child is in yuck, it leads to this behavior that frustrates us. Maybe defiance or disrespect or lack of cooperation. And all of this is the negative behavior that leads to more parents' yuck. And a cycle is created. And if we don't get out of this cycle, it's very hard to create more positive behavior. So we have to really be aware of how the yuck factor impacts behavior. So what I want you to do is think of situations where you've been really frustrated, and maybe power struggles have occurred, or big arguments or conflict have occurred, and think about whether it could have been caused by yuck. You want to consider the situation from your perspective. Is it possible that you were in some sort of yuck, feeling overwhelmed or helpless, feeling maybe guilty about not handling the situation right, or resentment about doing so much for your kids and can't they just pick up their toys? Then you want to consider the situation from your child's perspective. Is it possible that they're in yuck based on having to stop doing something fun, or based on their expectations not being met, based on feeling helpless at the time because there's nothing they can do, or feeling out of control? Is it possible that yuck was involved? And chances are that it is very likely yuck was involved with this situation. So obviously we want to know what to do instead. And I will tell you, this is not about being permissive. A lot of people will hear that I'm a positive parenting specialist and they'll think that this is about permissive parenting, and that is absolutely the furthest from the truth. Because when I was in graduate school, I actually studied the constructs of resilience and self-esteem. And I know for a fact that if you want to raise resilient children with good self-esteem, you must have really firm boundaries. And you must teach kids how the world works. So this is the opposite of being permissive. In fact, in my home, I'm definitely way more strict than my husband. This is also not about trying to make kids feel good all the time and giving them what they want with the hopes that they're going to get out of yuck. That's not what it's about at all. This is about understanding how the brain works. This is about enforcing those boundaries and teaching children positive behavior, but waiting to do that until the yuck is addressed. What we often do is that we jump right into correcting behavior while the yuck is still present, and it does not work. So what I've done is I've created a parenting by heart strategy, which can actually address everybody's yuck and still promote positive behavior. And this is what I teach most parents when they want to know how to interact with their children. This strategy is really easy to remember in the moment, because I don't know about you, but in the moment when my child's doing something, I need something really easy to remember. The strategy is calm, connect, correct. And what that does, calm, is helping a parent deal with their yuck so they get out of yuck. And it's connect, where the parents helps their child get out of their yuck, because connection is actually one really great way to help children get from the emotional to the rational part of their brain. Once the parent's yuck is dealt with, the child's yuck is dealt with, that's when we get to correct. An incorrect parent is absolutely remaining firm with boundaries. And a parent is teaching a child how to act responsibly and respectfully, teaching all the behavior that it really is our responsibility to teach our children. So I want to give you an example of what calm, connect, correct would look like in real life. And I'm going to talk about what usually happens and then the parenting by heart approach. So let's say you have a child who's watching videos and ignoring their mother's request to get ready to go to school. And this is one I like to use because it applies to children of almost any age. Even if your child isn't old enough to watch videos, maybe they're doing something else that they enjoy and they don't want to leave and they don't want to get out of the house in the morning. So the traditional approach, what usually happens is very often parents will start calm, and they'll remind their child maybe once, twice, even 3 times in a calm voice, hey, we need to go to school. Can you stop watching that video or doing what you're doing? And then when the child doesn't listen, that's where the voice starts to rise and the yelling happens. The nagging becomes really tremendous. The threats start. You can't go to your friend's house this weekend if you don't get off that computer or get off that video. The punishments are doled out. You have to go in timeout, or you're going to be grounded, or something like that. And a lot of the time our our language becomes very shaming and judgmental and makes kids just feel really, really bad, which just all of those things create so much yuck. The parenting by heart approach is going to use calm, connect, correct to deal with this situation. So what happens is the parent gets to a calm state. And I know I will just, as an aside, say, everyone always says to me, well, how do I get to a calm state? And that's actually what I work with parents to teach them how to do. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview of it in a slide or two. So I will talk about that. But for this example, let's just assume you already know how to get to a calm state. When you recognize your yuck, then you can access the rational part of your brain that allows you to recognize the most effective route to get your child to cooperate is to use connection and correction. So what you're going to do next, actually I realize this slide is backwards. It should be calm, connect, correct. Because what you're going to do next is you're going to connect. And you're going to know that your child must feel safe and secure and must get out of yuck in order to access the cooperative part of their brain. And you'll recognize that to get to this place, your child needs respect and age-appropriate control. And you're going to connect in this way. And I'll tell you in a few minutes what this actually sounds like. But lastly, you're going to go to correct. You're going to make a suggestion for what your child can do instead. And you're going to teach your child how to do something that they might not know how to do yet. So what this actually looks like and sounds like is, let's say you see your child watching this video, and you walk over and you say, hey, I see you're watching a video. And the child maybe at this point is still ignoring you. And you say, can you tell me what that video is about? What are you watching? And the child maybe even still is ignoring you. You may take a little peek over and try to engage your child based on what their interest is. So you talk a little bit about the video. And you talk a little bit about why that child is interested in the video. You're connecting with your child. And you're realizing that they were doing something that they were enjoying, that their perspective is just as important as yours. And once this connection is created, once your child is no longer in yuck and resentment because you're just ignoring their perspective, that's when you do the correction and you say, hey, we have to go to school now. Do you want to watch that video tonight? Or do you want to watch it this weekend? And you're going to make some suggestions that teaches the child how to make a different decision. Now, if they're not in a good place, if you haven't connected, they're just going to become more angry when you make this suggestion. But if you've connected first and you're making some recommendations that respects their perspective, which is in this case they want to watch the video, they're much more likely to cooperate. So you're being firm with your boundaries, but you're also explaining what your expectations are in a way that respects their perspective. So the result of calm, connect, correct is that the parent is not in yuck, the child is not in yuck, and the child is in a place to learn how to do the right thing. Remember, when they're in yuck, when they're not connected, when you're not calm, they're not in a place to actually learn what to do differently next time. And I will tell you, because I have done this for so long, that with respect and repetition, children become internally motivated to make healthy choices. I'm going to say that again. With respect and repetition, children become internally motivated to make healthy choices. Both components need to be present. We need to respect children and we need to repeat, because learning new things takes time. You don't want someone to put you on a basketball court if you're not a basketball player, tell you something once or twice and expect you to be really good at it, especially if you're under stress or pressure. Repetition is a part of this process, but when you're respecting and repeating at the same time, your child's brain is open to hearing what you have to say. They're able to access the rational, problem-solving, cooperative part of their brain so that they can actually learn the right choice to do, and that's when they're internally motivated to make good choices so that you don't have to yell and nag and do all of those things that make you feel really bad. So one thing I do want to mention, as I said, so many people ask me about getting to calm because that's a huge part of my strategy, obviously. So I do want to say that this is going to be very personal for each person, but I do have some suggestions that are general ones that you can think about in order to find your strategy for getting to calm. The first step I always start to talk to parents about is to recognize the signs in your body when you are leaving calm or when you're starting to get into yuck. Because your body, whether you're aware of it in this moment or not, your body actually sends you signals to tell you that you're going to a different state of mind. It's actually our fight or flight response speaking. We actually have these symptoms that appear. So I know for me, my face starts to get hot and I start to just almost shake because I'm so angry. Those signs in my body are telling me that at that moment, if I do something, I will regret it. So a lot of the work I do is to teach parents how to figure out what are the signs in your body and how can you hear them. The next thing to do once you've recognized those signs is to just stop. Do not do anything. And unless your child is literally running across the street in front of a moving car, there's no reason for you to act in that very moment. Chances are you will just regret whatever you do. So you feel the signs, you stop, and you bring your brain back to safe and secure so that you can access the prefrontal cortex, so you can access your ability to solve problems and act consistently with your morals and values. There are a lot of ways to bring yourself back to safe and secure. The most common and popular one that you've probably heard of is deep breathing, which actually tells your body that you're safe, which is why it works. For some people, they can't actually enact deep breathing in the moment. They might need other strategies, and I have a list of so many strategies that you can use. I know for me, I actually use a mantra that I say over and over, and when I say that mantra, it starts to calm me down. Some people, when they're in this really heightened state, need to do something like a complicated math problem. And there's actually evidence that shows that doing a complicated math problem actually uses a different part of your brain, and it lets you feel more safe. The key here is that you do have to bring your brain back a little bit. And then even once you do that, my suggestion is not to do anything until you can follow a plan that you created ahead of time. So always work with parents to say, okay, let's identify the behavior that's most frustrating in your child. And we're going to create a plan now while you're in the rational part of your brain that you're going to do in the future. So let's say maybe something that gets a parent frustrated is that their child is whining. And when their child whines, they get into yuck and they react. What we do is we actually create a plan while we're sitting there and the child isn't whining for what the parent wants to do. So maybe the parent, when the child whines, is going to speak in a whisper and just do that until the child calms down. But the key is they're not going to do anything except the plan that they came up with ahead of time. So to get to calm, you're going to do some variation probably of these steps. Recognize the signs, stop, bring your brain back, and whatever you do, make sure it's consistent with the plan that you came up with ahead of time. So that's a little hint about the way that I teach parents to get to calm. Now I'm going to start to wrap up. I'm going to tell you the good news and the better news about yuck. Yuck is not a clinical diagnosis. I can tell you I'm trained as a clinical psychologist, and yuck is nowhere in the DSM, which is the manual we use to diagnose. It's just not in there. And the good news is that yuck doesn't necessarily need any complicated interventions. It doesn't necessarily need medication. It just needs awareness of what yuck is and how to start to move out of it. Even better, you do not have to try to prevent all yuck. It's actually impossible to prevent all yuck, and if you try to prevent it, you're going to get into yuck yourself because of the pressure you create for yourself. So what I suggest instead is to parent proactively, and when you're not in yuck, work on your relationship and work on building a reservoir of really positive feelings so that when yuck does come around, it makes it more bearable when it does happen. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but if you've had a really good day with your child and for some reason something sets you off and you go into yuck, they're much more willing to overlook it in that moment. So building a reservoir proactively makes yuck much more bearable when it does happen. So what I highly recommend, now that you've learned about the yuck factor, is to look for patterns to figure out what is causing your yuck. Think about the times when you do the behaviors you regret, when you yell, when you struggle. Think about what is going on for you that's actually causing your behavior, because when you do that, you will find your yuck. Same thing with your child. Think about when they have the meltdowns or the tantrums or when they're defiant or disrespectful, because very likely what's at the end of that path is their yuck. And a lot of parents can figure this out on their own, but what I've done is I've actually created this session in which we work together and I help you figure out the yuck and the solutions to yuck. So what this session is a 90-minute session, and I usually charge $175. Now it can be done over the phone. The first thing we do is we determine what is creating the yuck. We actually figure out specifically what's causing the yuck. So we consider those three big causes that I mentioned: our biological needs not being met, our emotional needs not being met, our expectations not being met. The next thing I do is I actually teach the tool for identifying the yuck in any situation, because sometimes parents do struggle, and I'll tell you exactly how I figure it out over and over every single time. And then I give you a personalized recommendation sheet for handling negative behavior both in the moment and proactively. So I've actually created, this is an example of a reducing the yuck factor personalized plan that I've given to parents. And you can actually read this through. You can pause your screen right here. So this is an example. What I do is we go over the behavior. we go over the yuck factors to consider, because every yuck factor is going to have a solution. And then I actually give suggestions for what to say and do, both in the moment when the yuck is happening and proactively to make the yuck, to reduce the likelihood of the yuck to begin with. So when we do this session together, you basically leave with the knowledge of what the yuck is and how to fix it. But as a thank you, I just want to say, always try to thank parents for joining me on these webinars. And this is really why I wanted you to stay till the end. If you sign up tonight, or as long as this presentation is available, which is going to be about a week, I will give you this session for $147. So just as a thank you, I'm going to reduce the cost of that yuck factor. And what I'm going to do is, in the email that I send this link to this webinar, to this video, you'll see exactly where you can go to get that price. So this is the point in the presentation where I usually ask for questions, and I did get some questions on the live version of this presentation. And what I'm going to do is actually ask you, if you didn't see this live, if you're seeing the replay, or even if you did, what I'm going to do is actually send around everybody's questions and my answers to them in another email, so that you will have access to other people's questions. Obviously, because this isn't live, you can't send them to me right now, but I urge you to respond to the email that included the link to this presentation and ask me any questions you have about the yuck factor or your particular situation. And I will send all of the questions and responses to everybody who has tuned in. So that is it for the yuck factor. I hope you've gotten some information that's been helpful for you, that explains some of the behavior in your home. I really look forward to seeing you in the future and hearing more about your situation, helping you feel confident about raising respectful, responsible children. I'll see you next time.